So today I thought we would talk a little bit, and little bit being almost the operative word because you need way more than a short video, but we're going to talk a little bit about VO2 Max because VO2 Max is, I don't want to say a buzzword, but kind of a buzzword now. Most Garmin watches are measuring or attempting to measure your VO2 Max and tell you what it is. I will tell you that I don't find that especially accurate. They claim to be within about 3 points of what your VO2 Max actually is. And in my experience, it's also affected a lot by conditions outside, although I think some of the higher end watches determine those conditions or put those conditions in place. So, for example, for me, I know that if I am in cool weather and then all of a sudden I have a warm, humid day, meaning I have to slow my pace down for conditions, boom, it drops the VO2 max. Well, the conditions are a little bit different. Anyway, a lot is said about VO2 max, so I thought I'd do some of the hard ones on VO2 max. So, first, what is it? So VO2 max, kind of as the name implies, it's your maximum oxygen consumption where you're still using aerobic energy. And why is that important? Because aerobic energy is what you're using for pretty much every distance. It is the main thing after 800 meters. So if you're an 800 meter racer, you don't care that much about aerobic energy because you're going to do a lot of anaerobic work. But most of you listening to this are probably more like 5K for the marathon, and aerobic is really important. And so it is the max oxygen consumption for aerobic energy, because once you are faster or a harder effort than VO2 max, you're starting to use the anaerobic energy, which distance runners for the most part don't really care about because that's not the energy that we use. Now, some things that you may not know, may not really want to know is, your VO2 max is kind of largely genetic. You have a ceiling. So not everybody is going to have a 75 VO2 max like an elite marathoner might, or 80 or 85. You've got some type of ceiling for what you're going to have. You can get towards your ceiling with training. Usually it's about 20 to 30%. That's a very rough estimate. But if you're untrained, you're probably not at your genetic maximum VO2 max. But if you're, I'm just going to make up the numbers. I don't know if this math will work. But if you're at 40 right now and you haven't done any training, you start doing training, you can maybe increase that 40 by 20 to 30%. But that's about it. It's not like you can just keep increasing it forever. There's a ceiling that you have on there. Now, some things that are going to help determine what you can do from VO2 max are your max heart rate is important. Your stroke volume is important, and oxygen extraction is important. So let me talk about the middle two. I think max heart rate, people understand, that's genetic. You can't change your max heart rate. It is what it is. It's different for everybody, but that's a factor in what your VO2 max probably is. Stroke volume is how much blood you're delivering to the muscles with every pump. It's specifically the left ventricle. And so what you want to have is, if you haven't trained at all, think of your left ventricle as being a squirt gun. And with a lot of training, you want to turn it into a super soaker. So it's delivering a lot more blood and oxygen to the muscles. So that stroke volume matters. You can affect that with training. And oxygen extraction matters. How much of that oxygen can you deliver and use by the muscles, and you can affect that with training. Max heart rate cannot change that, but you can change the other two things. How do you change those? It's actually lots of easy running, and then you want to dose of VO2 max running, but it's primarily a lot of easy running, which everybody wants to run faster, 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 but if you don't have the easy running, it won't do any good. Why is it? So the easy running is what improves your stroke volume. Easy running increases the number of capillaries you have, which is the delivery method of getting oxygen and fuel to your muscles. And it also increases the size and number of something called mitochondria, which is how you are using that energy. So that's how you affect and are able to improve your VO2 max. You turn your heart into a super soaker. You get a lot more capillaries. You get bigger and more mitochondria. That allows you to do more oxygen extraction. Of course, all that is no good if you don't do that small dose of running at VO2 max, because that's how you utilize those things. So then you have to run at your VO2 max. And that's kind of a tricky thing. First of all, the only way you're really going to know what your VO2 max is to get tested in a lab. Most of us don't have the ability to get that done. But everything else is kind of an estimate, and that's the best we can do. And I'm going to go through some of the estimates. But you want to be running at VO2 max. The issue is, if you run a little bit faster, you will cross over into anaerobic, and you're going to get the wrong training adaptation, because we don't really care about anaerobic for distance running. We care about aerobic. If you go a little bit too easy, you're not getting the full benefit. When all is said and done, I would rather you be a little bit too easy than a little bit too hard, because at least you're still using the aerobic system. Now, ways to kind of guesstimate where your VO2 max is It's typically somewhere between your 3K and 5K pace. You can also go to some of the calculators out there like McRun and VDOT, put in a race time. They will try and estimate what it is. They'll call it speed work in the case of McRun. Daniels and VDOT calls it I pace. Those are typically your VO2 max pace. It's about 94 to 98% of your max heart rate is where VO2 max is. So you can see that's a pretty darn good effort. It's also a words pace. And what I mean by words is towards the end of the interval, it wouldn't happen at the beginning. You're in a situation where you really don't want to talk, but if you could talk, you could only spit out so you can get some words out. If you absolutely couldn't talk at all, you're probably running too hard. And if you can get out a sentence, you're probably not running hard enough. So generally it's like 3K to 5K pace, 94 to 98% of your max heart rate once you're warmed up, and it's kind of a words pace. Now, running at VO2 max, how much do you want? It takes about 1.5 to 2 minutes of running before you'll hit VO2 max. Now, the more you're running when you're doing intervals, the shorter that time period becomes because your heart's already beating a little bit faster. But it's going to, from a dead start, take 1.5 to 2 minutes to get there. You're looking to accumulate about 11 to 12 minutes of total time for the workout at VO2 max. That's not at all one time. Most people would struggle to run 11 to 12 minutes straight at VO2 max. The effort's just too hard. That's one reason we break it up into intervals, whether it be 400s, 500s, 1K, 1200. It just depends upon the workout. So here's a very, very rough example. I don't know that this math is actually true, but it's an example. So let's say you're doing 6 by 800 meters at 3:30, which is a 7-minute pace. Let's say that's your VO2 max, and you're doing 90-second recovery after those. Well, that first one, since you're kind of at a cold start, you might only get about 90 seconds of that 3 minutes and 30 seconds at your VO2 max because it takes a while to get there. If you're watching your heart rate, it might only be for that last 90 seconds that your heart rate gets into that 94 to 98 zone. Then you get 90 seconds recovery. So maybe the next time it's 100 seconds. Maybe the next time it's 120, then 130, then 150, and it kind of stays at 150. The reason it goes up every time is you're getting 90 seconds of recovery, but your heart rate is still not going down as much, and you got to get right back at it. So that time that it takes to get there shortens. And in this particular case, it happened to work out to be about 12 minutes. But that's what you're doing with intervals, is realizing the early intervals aren't quite there. The later intervals, you probably get more there, but you want about 11 to 12 minutes at that total time. So one final thing on VO2 max. So let's say you've had the lab test, and it said that in my example that 7-minute pace is what you should be running for VO2 max, and you find out that you're trying to do these 6 by 800s, and you can't do that. You can't hit the pace, or you can't hold that pace for all of them. So when that happens, you can't hit or hold the pace, it's kind of an indication that you need to go back and do more of the easy work. As I said in the beginning, stroke volume is important, that oxygen extraction is important, and when you can't hit or hold those VO2 max paces, you might need more of the easy aerobic work so that your body can do those. And that's why in running, we have so much easy work and just small doses of the work like VO2 max. So hope that helps, but any questions, put them down below. I'll see if I can answer them.